Thanks for finding Discovery Class. David is going to be king. And you can find the tiny summary of the run-up to the throne of Israel if you read the tail end of Psalm 78. Here's what it says. God chose David, his servant, handpicked him from his work in the sheepfold. One day, he's caring for the ewes and their lambs. And the next day, God had him shepherding Jacob, his people, Israel, his prized possession. His good heart made him a good shepherd. He guided the people wisely, and he guided them well. Do you guide wisely and well? David is 30 years old, and he's going to reign for the next 40 years. God chose David, and he called him his servant when he was only 17 years old. And between the years 17 and the years 30, David was on the run, chased down by Saul, the king of Israel. He wanted to kill him. Now David is king. The Bible says his good heart and good integrity guided his subjects with a skillful hand for the next 40 years. Have you ever walked through an art gallery? I did in Paris many years ago. It used to be the train station at the site of the World Trade Fair. That's when the Eiffel Tower was unveiled, and the year was 1896. It's called the d'Orsay Museum today, and it's one of the finest collections of art masters, I think, in the whole world. Impressionists, portrait artists, modern artists, from Rembrandt to Picasso. Do you know that your life and mine is like an art gallery? On those walls are all your pictures of yesteryear. Your home, your siblings, schoolmates, your childhood, your parents, achievements, your difficulties, even your joys, and I suppose even your sorrows. Can you remember those murals that stand out? Those that bring pleasure and those that brought victory? Even those that maybe brought you some despair and defeat. David is now king. We have already observed some of the canvases that made up his life so far, leading up to this coronation. He's now the second king of Israel, chosen and anointed by God. And remember, the king's palace was in Jerusalem. That would be his Buckingham Palace. But he didn't go there right away when he was crowned. Instead, he lived in the town of Hebron. That's where he began his 40-year reign, but for his first 7 years. Now, Hebron is a little town 20 miles north of Jerusalem, 2,800 feet above the Sea of Mediterranean, right in the hills and the mountains of Judah. But he just didn't live there and reign. He also started his family there. During that time, David had 6 children, but he had these 6 children by 6 different wives. Now, I've been married to one wife for 59 years, and we got 3 kids. I can't imagine my house with even one more wife. Here was David. He had 6, and he had 6 kids. Polygamy in David's life was one of his downfalls, and it would later come back to haunt him. Here's an old expression, and it was said by Nietzsche, the famous German philosopher. He said this: power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. In 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 6, I want you to listen to what the Bible describes David's personality and his kingship as he begins to build. He's just arrived in Jerusalem. Power never corrupted David. Here's what the book says. David captured the stronghold of Zion. That was the city of Jerusalem. And David became greater and greater, for the Lord God of hosts was with him. Hiram, who was the king of Tyre, he sent cedar trees, carpenters, stonemasons, and they built a new house for David. And David began to realize that the Lord had established him as a king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people. David's power, David's prestige, and David's blessing began to overflow, but it didn't corrupt him. When I studied this period of history many years ago in university, my professor was Dr. Shlomo Marinov. He told our class that David's reign was the most powerful and the most prosperous of any nation in the Middle East. It celebrated the most dynamic period in all of Western Asia. David ruled the Hittites, he ruled the Philistines, Egyptians, Moabites, Ammon, Edomites, Petra, Jordan, Lebanon. David was not only their king, but he was also their judge. And he became their general. Commercial highways opened up. Merchandise and wealth began to flow through Israel. David's Israel became the trade route for goods and services coming all the way from Phoenicia, Damascus, Asia, India, and Arabia. To every nation around, David was not only the king, he was also the mightiest monarch of his day. The hand of God was with David, and he blessed him, and he unified the whole nation. And David wasn't a priest. He had nothing to do with the temple, but he did one better. He destroyed all the idols and idolatry in the land of Israel when he became king. And the boundary of the country, it began to expand, it got to grow. From 6,000 square miles, during his reign, that 6,000 square miles became 60,000 square miles. Do you know how big that is? That's almost 3 times the size of Banff Park, which is that big park behind me, just out about 100 kilometers. When you think of David, all kinds of thoughts flood through your mind. When you think of your Sunday school teaching under your teacher listening about what David did, maybe it was David and Goliath that you remember. Or maybe you were taught David and Jonathan and their close friendship. Do you remember that? Maybe it was David the prophet and Samuel who anointed him king. Maybe you remember David and Saul. He was the adversary. What about David and Bathsheba when he falls into sin? Do you remember that story? David and Absalom, whose life was cut short. Do you want to know what God remembered about David? You'll find the answer in the New Testament. If you come to the book of Acts, chapter 13, verse 22, the writer is Luke, but he's talking about a speech that was given by Paul. And Paul is speaking to a group of people about their Jewish history. And he's building a case for the new Messiah. Jesus has come. But in the process, he speaks of the Jewish past. And after God removed Saul, the book says, he raised up David to be their king. I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, who will do all my will. Do you do God's will? Those last words really tell it all. Who will do all my will. Bill Fry, he was a professor at the University of Colorado in 1951. He tells this story about a blind student named John, who was a student in his class. Bill asked him, "How did you lose your sight?" He said, I lost my sight as a teenager when a bottle of acid exploded in my face and I lost my sight. But he not only lost his sight, he said, he also lost his way. He lost his future. He gave up. He locked himself in his room. He quit school. He said, I took my anger out on everybody in my life, especially my dad. I didn't lift a finger. I made everybody wait on me. And I shut myself in my room and I only came out for meals. Bill Fry, his professor, looked surprised and he said, well, you don't display bitterness and you don't display anger now that you're in my class. What changed you? He said, my dad did. He said he got sick of my behavior. And he scolded me for feeling sorry for myself. He told me, winter is coming. I want you to get off your butt and I want you to mount the storm windows on the house. And I want it all done before I get home from work tonight. And he slammed the door and he left. Hearing that, John just cursed. He groped his way to the garage, found the windows, got the stepladder, grabbed some tools, began to work. It'll serve my dad right, he said. If I fall off the ladder and break my neck, it's his fault. He didn't fall off the ladder. Little by little, inch by inch, all around the house, the windows got on, and he finished his chore. Back in the house, John reluctantly realized he could still work. Eating the meal that night, he also learned something else. He learned that at no time during the day had his father ever been more than 4 or 5 feet from his presence, from the time he went in the garage until he finished the job. His dad didn't go to work. He stayed and watched over his son. That father's heart had never left the boy's side. He just wanted his son to do his will. And he stood just there watching. That's what God does for you. He keeps an eye on you even though you've given up and you've decided you're going to lock the door. When the Lord found you, maybe that was you. All he wants from you is to do his will. And that's what David did. And God said to him, he's a man after my own heart who will do all my will. There's a young single mom. She had a frail baby, and they were living in a small community in the little village. But in there, she found a very loving neighbor. Every few days, that old neighbor would stop by, and she would keep the child so that she could shop. That neighbor shared more than time. She also shared her faith, and she shared her generous lifestyle. Well, when the young lady's mother heard about it, she scolded her daughter for letting a stranger into her house that she didn't even know. You have no idea what that old woman could do for your child, she scolded her daughter. The daughter looked at her and said, yes, I do, Mom. She holds my baby. She's also a woman after my own heart. She does all my will. Whatever I ask, she does, Mom. And I want you to know, I think I just found an angel from heaven. Some years ago, in Gloucester, England, small town, they celebrated the annual rummage sale to raise funds for the local hospital. And all kinds of items were donated for sale. Some items were small, some items were large. Some came from the homes in the town, some came from the farms. Furniture items, clothing, baking. There's an old cider press, a cream separator, antique wagon wheel, garden tools, fresh vegetables and fruit, canned goods, lots of things. But last of all, there was a beautiful puppy, a border collie, just 2 months old. Everything was sold. The auction drew to a close, and the big crowd was still in that hall. And the last article that was going to be sold was that 2-month-old border collie. Sitting in the audience was the local wealthy baron who owned hundreds of acres, hid behind that gated stone fence. There's another guest. Her name is Lady Sutton, the wealthy widow of the owner of the woolen mill in the town nearby. The bidding for the little puppy began with lots of enthusiasm and good bids. £1. Now you remember, Britain has a currency named the pound. We call ours a dollar. Their pound sterling is valued at almost 1 1/3 more than ours. So $1.35 in a pound would be $1 in our money. So here the bid began, £1, and then it went to £2, and then £3, then 3.5 pounds, and then 3 3/4. Who'll give me £4? Said the auctioneer. Then a deep voice from the baron's chair called out, £10. Well, the auctioneer was surprised, but he was encouraged, and the excitement in his voice made him yell out all the louder, £10 bid I've got for the little dog. And the little dog was sitting on the table, not knowing what was going on. He was a little frightened, just staring. The auctioneer acknowledged the £10, and he said, well, somebody give me £12. Well, from the far side of the room, a feminine voice spoke up and said, £12. The auctioneer acknowledged, I've got £12, who'll give me 13? The capacity audience in that hall became very still. And the people began to whisper between themselves. They sort of sensed that something embarrassing could happen. And no one wanted that. Well, over the years, the Baron and Lady Sutton, they didn't get along. There was rivalry, and it went back for a whole generation. And it wasn't always pleasant. As a result, neither family spoke to each other. They just kept their distance. £12 I got, said the auctioneer. Do I hear 13? 13, yelled the Baron. The audience gasped. 13 I got, said the voice. A bidding war began between two wealthy individuals over a little 2-month-old dog, a border collie, who now laid quietly at the auctioneer's table. And that poor little dog was oblivious that he was the star of the show. £15 I got, give me 20, 20, give me 50. The numbers began to keep climbing. And the two bidders, now they weren't speaking, they were just gesturing, or maybe a nod of the head. And the auctioneer would catch it, and he would acknowledge that that was their bid and it was accepted. £50 became £100. £100 became £500, and the price at that day, you could shingle your roof for that. £500 became £1,000. Well, that was the price of the best racehorse. Sitting in the corner, quietly observing all that was going on, was the chairman of the hospital board. They were going to be the recipients of all the auction's funds. Well, everybody knew what he was thinking. £1,000 became £2,000. Upward the bids spiraled. By now the audience was a bit breathless. What's going on? Why are two wealthy people acting this way? £9,000 bid Lady Sutton. Well, there was a hush in the crowd and everyone stared at the Baron. It seemed like the longest pause. And then he said, £10,000. Do you know how much money that is in Canada? That's $13,000. The audience cheered, stunned in disbelief. Many of them thought, well, this can't be happening. This auction is out of control. The auctioneer was an old man. He was an old professional. He had a lot of dignity, and he also had a lot of experience. He picked up the little dog and he held it in his arms. Something inside him told him that the bidding was over. Deliberately, he said over the loudspeaker, "Do I hear £10,100? Pointing to the little dog. Everyone watched Lady Sutton. What is she going to do? Do I hear 10,100 once? No movement. Do I hear 10,100 twice? Still silence. Sold to the party in the seat beyond me. £10,000. Well, the audience exploded. People sitting near the Baron, they stood and they applauded. Those sitting near Lady Sutton, they not only cheered, they also gave her a look of satisfaction that she had not lost a thing. And in a subtle way, she probably got even. The auctioneer left the platform. He walked over to the Baron and he presented that two-month-old dog to the Baron and laid it on his lap. But the auction wasn't over yet. The Baron received the little dog, and he just stood and he stroked his white head. And he stared down at him, almost as if he had something to tell him. He then did something that would change the hearts of that whole community. Do you know what he did? He walked across the hall to Lady Sutton, and he placed the little dog on her lap. And he said to her, "This young fella wanted to live at your house all along. And I don't think he could find a nicer master." When God handed David the palace in Jerusalem, he said to him, "Young man, here's where I wanted you to live all along. And I'm going to be your master, and you are going to be my king." I want you to come back next week, and I'm going to tell you how this all begins to unfold.